Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are getting into something that honestly completely broke my brain a little bit when I first read through the source materials.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a massive paradigm shift. It completely changes how you look at the internet.
Right, because if you're listening to this, you probably spend all your time interacting with the visual internet. The glass, the steel, the pretty user interfaces. But today we're unpacking an open secret in technical systems architecture.
Yeah, we're looking at this truly fascinating stack of raw research logs, architectural notes, and transcripts from a series of federated peer-paired programming sessions. And these are across multiple AI models like ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, Safehood.
And it all centers around a developer known in these logs as the sovereign pilot.
Exactly, the sovereign pilot, who is building this thing called an accessibility ingestion engine, or an A11Y engine.
And the original goal of this engine was purely empathetic, right? Like, it was designed to perfectly and faithfully describe the visual world to a blind user, to stop AI hallucinations and just give a vivid description.
Right, that was the mission. But the mind-blowing part, and the reason we're doing this deep dive, is how that exact same empathetic tool accidentally created basically the most powerful technical SEO weapon on the modern internet.
Yes. And to understand why, we have to start with this one phrase from the research that it anchors everything we're going to talk about today. And the phrase is, search engine crawlers are fundamentally blind users.
I love that phrase. It's so accurate because, corporate thought leaders completely miss this point. You see it constantly in systems design.
Oh, all the time.
Right. Companies treat accessibility as this annoying compliance checkbox. They'll upload a highly complex, information-rich image to their corporate website, and they'll just slap a lazy 5-word tag on it.
Like alt equals company event.
Exactly. Alt equals company event. And they do it just to get their automated compliance software to stop throwing errors. It's treating accessibility as a tax rather than an actual architectural discipline.
But when you step into the bare metal systems approach of the sovereign pilot, you realize how much money and authority is just being left on the table. And for anyone listening who might not be a developer, when we say bare metal, we're talking about interacting with a system at its lowest, most foundational level.
Yeah, without the graphical user interface acting as a buffer.
Right. Because when Googlebot or Bingbot hits your web page, it literally does not care about your cascading style sheets.
Yeah.
It doesn't see your drop shadows or your perfectly kerned typography or, your color palettes.
It reads the raw DOM stream, the document object model.
The skeleton of the page. And I want to break down what a DOM stream actually is for you listening, because it is so crucial to understanding this exploit. Think of a web page not as a painting, but as a filing cabinet.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so when the search crawler arrives, it doesn't stand back and admire the painting. It rips open the filing cabinet and just starts feeling the folders in the dark. It reads the code tags, header 1, paragraph, image source, alt text. It navigates purely by the structural semantics you provide.
Which brings us directly to the sovereign pilot's concept of the dual-channel Trojan horse.
Yes, the Trojan horse.
This is just a masterpiece of systems design. So the sovereign pilot realized that if you're building an engine to generate these vivid 999 character image descriptions for visually impaired users, you are simultaneously building a massive data payload for these blind search engine crawlers.
Because it's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. To the sighted user, the visual layer of the web page remains completely clean, uncluttered, minimalist. You just see a nice photograph. The visual aesthetic is totally preserved.
But embedded directly in the HTML.
Right there in the code.
Yeah, right in the DOM stream we just talked about is this massive 999 character block of hyper-descriptive text. It's a dual-channel payload. One channel is visual and meant for human eyes, and the other channel is structural, meant for screen readers and search algorithms.
Let's contrast the data density here just to really illustrate the impact for the listener. Let's say the image uploaded to a website is of a cat sitting on a table. The lazy corporate approach gives the search engine alt equals cat. That is practically zero semantic information, like what kind of cat, where is it, what is it doing?
Nothing. It's just a void.
Right. But the sovereign pilot's high-fidelity approach, this 999 character block, provides something entirely different. The text in the code might read, a black cat occupies the center of a worn wooden table, facing forward with tail curled around its paws under direct window light. Behind it, the rest of the room recedes into shadow.
Oh, wow. The geometry of those words is incredible. You have entities,
Yeah.
lighting cues of specific objects, environmental relationships.
It's a completely rendered scene.
And this is the moment we need to explain why this matters to anyone who cares about how information is found today. Because, a decade ago, search engines relied on exact keyword matching. You type black cat table into a search bar, and the engine would literally look for pages that contain those exact 3 words in a row.
Yeah, the old literal match.
But that is not how the internet works anymore.
No, modern search engines run entirely on semantic vector embeddings.
Okay, I want to pause here and really dig into semantic vector embeddings. Because if you understand this, you understand the future of the internet. How does a vector embedding map that 999 character description compared to the old keyword method?
So think of a vector embedding as a way of translating human language into a massive, multidimensional mathematical map.
Okay.
Instead of looking at words as isolated strings of letters, a modern search algorithm assigns a coordinate to every single concept. Words with similar meanings or contexts are grouped closer together in this mathematical space.
So they're mapped by association.
Exactly. So the concept of a worn wooden table and direct window light aren't just strings of text to the algorithm. They are plotted points that imply a specific mood, a certain setting, a realistic physical environment.
So if I search for, say, moody afternoon feline photography,
Yeah.
even if those exact words aren't in the Sovereign Pilot's text at all, the vector embedding understands that direct window light receding into shadow and black cat-curled paws occupy the exact same conceptual neighborhood in that mathematical space.
Precisely. You nailed it. When the vector indexers at Google or Bing ingest that high-fidelity 999 character description, you are giving the algorithm massive semantic surface area to latch onto. You're handing it a highly detailed map.
And it perfectly anchors the page's relevance.
Yeah, it tells the search engine with absolute certainty this page is deeply, demonstrably about this highly specific scenario. You aren't just saying a cat exists, you are validating the entire context of the page.
But, okay, I have to push back on this, because anyone listening who has spent 10 minutes working in technical SEO is probably screaming at their device right now.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to ask.
Right, because if I take 1,000 characters of raw, hyper-descriptive keywords, basically an entire blog post's worth of text, and I dump it into a hidden div tag, or I make the text the exact same color as the background so human users can't see it, Google will nuke my ranking from orbit.
Immediately. It's instant death for a domain.
Yeah, that is classic 1990s era black hat spam. Search algorithms are updated daily to penalize hidden text. So why doesn't this 999 character payload trigger every spam filter on the web?
Because of what the research logs call the ultimate compliance shield?
The compliance shield.
Yeah. The text we are talking about doesn't live in a hidden spam tag. It doesn't live in a font color to match the background. It lives inside an alt attribute. And the alt attribute is a federally protected, internationally mandated space.
Wait, elaborate on that. Protected how? Like, legally?
Yes, legally and structurally. The Sovereign Pilot designed this engine to strictly adhere to WCAG 2.2 Level AA. For our listeners, that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's the absolute gold standard for how to make digital content accessible to people with disabilities.
Okay.
And additionally, it adheres to federal Section 508 accessibility standards in the United States, which mandate that all electronic and information technology must be accessible.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. If a search engine algorithm were to penalize a website for having 999 characters of incredibly accurate, structurally perfect text inside an alt tag, they would effectively be penalizing a website for being accessible to the blind.
Ooh, wow.
They would be downranking a site for complying with federal law and international accessibility standards.
They can't flag it as spam because it is a mandated accessibility feature. They would be legally and ethically exposed if they program their crawlers to ignore or penalize high-density alt text.
It's the perfect structural paradox. They don't penalize it. They're forced to reward it. It's pure structural compliance on the surface, but it's maximum semantic density under the hood. You're serving the visually impaired user with the highest possible fidelity, and as a byproduct, you are handing the algorithmic crawler the exact contextual vector map data it desperately craves.
It is literally weaponized compliance. But, and this is a massive structural vulnerability in this entire theory, this Trojan horse strategy completely falls apart if the artificial intelligence writing that 999 character description is just making things up.
Oh, absolutely. The hallucination problem.
Right, because if the description is 1,000 characters of hallucinated nonsense,
Right.
you're doing two terrible things. First, you are actively lying to a blind user about what is on their screen, which is awful. And second, you're feeding garbage semantic data to the search engine, which will eventually ruin your vector mappings anyway.
Which is exactly why the Sovereign Pilot couldn't just use a stock AI model to generate this text. You can't just plug this into a default API. This brings us to the core problem they had to solve, transitioning from why this text is so valuable to how you actually generate it reliably at scale.
Because of the well-documented failure mode of AI image analysis is hallucination.
Left to its own devices, a standard AI model will look at an image and describe what is plausible for that scenario rather than what is actually rendered in the pixels.
And the research logs for the ChatGPT node in the source material break this down in a way that completely changed my understanding of AI. I mean, I always thought of AI hallucination as a writing problem. Like, the AI is just a bad journalist who fabricates quotes to make a story more interesting.
Most people think that.
Yeah, but the ChatGPT analysis pointed out that hallucination is not a writing problem at all. It's a sequence of operations problem.
Yes. Let's define what a sequence of operations problem actually looks like inside a large language model.
To understand this, we have to look at the underlying mechanics of how an LLM writes, right? Because an LLM isn't thinking like a human, it's just a massive autocomplete engine.
Exactly. It runs on next token prediction.
Right, it calculates the mathematical probability of what word should come next based on its training data. So if the AI generates the word businessman, mathematically, the most likely next tokens are words like suit, briefcase, or rushing to a meeting. It tracks itself in a probability loop.
It hallucinates because it's predicting what should be there contextually, not what the visual data actually confirms. It blends observation and inference in the exact same cognitive breath.
It doesn't separate them.
Right. It sees a person with a briefcase and a plausibly urban background, and the autocomplete loop immediately generates a businessman rushing to an important morning meeting.
But the image might just be a guy standing completely still on a movie set. The AI inferred rushing and meeting because those concepts are mathematically adjacent to briefcase in its training data. It composed prose while perceiving, which is a lethal sequence of operations failure.
And to stop this autocomplete probability loop from corrupting the alt text, the Sovereign Pilot built what they call an epistemic break.
The epistemic break.
Yeah. Epistemic relating to knowledge and how we validate what is actually true. The engine forces the AI to stop acting like a creative autocomplete algorithm and start acting like a sterile forensic witness.
The architecture for this pipeline is a masterclass in prompt engineering. They don't just ask the AI to be careful. They break the operation down into rigid, uncompromising steps that isolate the visual processing entirely from the language generation. Let's walk the listener through this pipeline, starting with the first mechanism, the evidence ledger.
So the evidence ledger is the absolute bedrock of this system. The engine is explicitly forbidden through strict prompt constraints from jumping from the uploaded image file directly into writing a description.
It's not allowed to write paragraphs yet.
It's not at all. Instead, it must internally pause and answer one question. What did I actually see? It has to build a sterile inventory before prose is allowed to exist.
It's taking forensic notes. Like if it looks at an image of an office, it cannot output the phrase a chaotic office. Because chaotic is an inference, it has to output a list. Observed, 3 human figures, 1 person peers seated, laptop visible on table, paper scattered on floor, readable text, session 0.
And the ChatGPT node highlighted a critical distinction here regarding those inferences. The absolute rule of the evidence ledger is that an inferred status does not become an observed status merely because the inference feels incredibly obvious to the AI.
The text gives a brilliant example of this rule in action. The AI is not allowed to say, a man is angry. Angry is an internal emotional state. You cannot literally see angry in the physics of a 2-dimensional photograph.
You can't photograph an emotion.
Exactly. You can only see the physical manifestation of muscle movements. So the evidence ledger must state, a person has their mouth open, teeth visible, and eyebrows drawn down and together.
It strips away all presumption. It breaks the image down into verified physical realities. And once that evidence ledger is built, the epistemic break doesn't disengage. It moves to the second mechanism, the confidence gate.
I love this part.
The system forces the AI to evaluate its own inventory and ask, am I sufficiently certain that I can state this as a fact? It literally forces the model to classify its own observations into high, medium, low, and unknown confidence.
It's so deliberate and mechanical. Because by forcing the AI to assign a confidence tier, you are interrupting its probability loop again. High means directly visible and unambiguous. Medium means it is visible, but perhaps obscured by shadow, or it's a low-resolution area of the image. Low means it requires interpretation based on surrounding context. And unknown means the physical reality just cannot be established from the pixels provided.
And the rules governing these tiers are ruthless. Low-confidence interpretations must not be presented as facts in the final output, period.
You just get dropped.
Yeah. And unknown observations must never be invented to fill in a blank space. Like if a person in the image is standing behind a desk and their lower half is obscured, the AI cannot guess they are wearing pants, even if it is mathematically highly probable. The lower half is unknown.
But the real genius of the epistemic break, the part that completely blows my mind as a system design, is the third step, adversarial re-inspection.
This step is crucial because it addresses the core flaw in how most developers try to get AI to self-correct. Usually, a developer will use a weak prompt like, review your answer and make sure it is correct.
Which is absolutely useless. If you tell an LLM to review its own work, it just references the probability weights it just generated, pats itself on the back, and outputs, yep, everything looks completely accurate. It suffers from automated confirmation bias.
Precisely. The AI just validates its own auto-complete loop. But the sovereign pilot forces a fundamentally different instruction set. The engine is told, look at the original image file again. Now, actively attempt to disprove every single factual statement in your proposed evidence ledger.
It turns the AI into a hostile cross-examiner of its own data. It isn't reviewing, it is attacking. It has to look for reasons why its initial observation might be a hallucination. Is that really a laptop on the table, or is it just a flat black binder reflecting light? It forces the model to stress test its own assumptions before a single word of the final description is written.
And only after this brutal, sterile inventory of facts is locked down, categorized by confidence, and adversarially attacked, does the engine move to the question of how to actually present those facts to a human being.
And this is where the philosophy of the engine really has to pivot. Because if you just read a blind person, the raw evidence ledger, if the screen reader just outputs high confidence, human figure, medium confidence, mouth open, high confidence, eyebrows raised, high confidence, laptop present, that is incredibly robotic.
It's awful to listen to.
Right. It's safe from hallucination, yes, but it is exhausting and sterile. It provides facts, but it doesn't provide an experience.
Which brings us to the Homer Gaines principles. And, it is worth exploring where this name comes from because it injects a surprising amount of humanity into this bare metal systems discussion. So the ChatGPT node initially misunderstood the prompt. When the sovereign pilot referenced Homer Gaines, the AI assumed this was some formal bureaucratic accessibility standard.
Like an obscure subsection of WCAG.
Exactly. But the pilot corrected the AI. Homer Gaines was not a corporate rulebook. He was a real person. He was the sovereign pilot's former manager at an older tech company called Chico's.
That's so cool. This entire framework is built on an institutional memory. It's an oral tradition of accessibility being passed down from a mentor to a developer.
And the core wisdom that Homer Gaines imparted to the pilot is profound. He told them, you have 1,000 characters. Don't waste them telling me a cat exists. Give the person who can't see the picture enough information to actually experience the scene.
Narrate. Don't enumerate. That is the paradigm shift right there. The goal of the engine isn't to build an image captioner. The goal is to be a screen reader dungeon master.
The Dungeon Master analogy is just the perfect lens for this. For any listener who hasn't played tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, the Dungeon Master, or DM is the person running the game. Their primary job is to describe a purely imaginary, invisible world so vividly and spatially that the players around the table feel like they are standing inside it.
Yeah, if a DM wants to describe a dungeon, they don't just read a list of nouns. They don't say, there is a goblin, there is a chest, there are walls. That is enumeration. A good DM uses spatial relationships to build a shared mental map. They say, in the center of the damp stone room, a goblin crouches aggressively over a rusted iron chest, clutching a jagged dagger while the torchlight flickers off the wet walls behind it.
And for a user who is entirely excluded from the visual channel, that spatialization is everything. You have to anchor the scene conceptually before you drown the reader in detail. You give them the geometry of the space, the center, the background, the light source, so their mind has a structural framework to place the objects you are about to describe.
But, okay, here is where I have to play devil's advocate again.
Yeah.
Because if we are suddenly telling a story like a dungeon master, if we're focusing on narrative flow and mood, aren't we risking slipping right back into the autocomplete hallucination loop? If I tell an LLM to be dramatic and narrative, Its probability weights are going to push it to start inventing things again to make the story sound better.
That is the exact tension the engine had to navigate. And it is where the Claude AI research node provided critical pushback during the federated testing. Claude recognized the danger of the narrative instruction and established a hard, non-negotiable boundary. The narrative richness must connect only verified elements from the evidence ledger.
Let's unpack the difference there. What does a verified narrative look like mathematically to the engine versus a hallucinated narrative?
So Claude codified it with a specific example. The phrase, facing the camera, is an observed spatial relationship. It's a verifiable vector of physical positioning. But the phrase, interrupted during an important meeting, is invented backstory. It is a forbidden narrative frame.
So the AI is allowed to use D&D style spatial storytelling. Like the black cat sits squarely in the middle of a worn wooden table, light from a nearby window falling across its paws while the room behind fades into shadow. Because every single one of those conceptual elements, the cat, center of table, paws, window light, shadow, was already verified in the adversarial evidence ledger. It's just weaving the verified facts together using spatial geometry.
Exactly. Narrative reorganizes verified observations. It is never permitted to manufacture them. Claude's node lock this into the engine's processing rules. No invented dialogue, no invented backstory, no invented location, identity, or immersion presented as fact. You build a deeply vivid, spatially coherent world, but you absolutely refuse to lie about what physical evidence exists in that world.
It is such a deeply respectful way to treat the user. You aren't giving them sterile, patronizing robot speak, but you aren't feeding them unverified fairy tales either. You're giving them the absolute verified visual physics of the moment, rendered beautifully.
But the sovereign pilot didn't stop at just describing the physical reality, and this is where the system design moves from being brilliantly functional into something deeply emotional and, frankly, a little subversive.
Yes. We have to talk about the smuggled signal. This is my absolute favorite part of the entire deep dive because it takes all this rigid, bare metal compliance architecture and injects a massive dose of humanity into it.
The pilot introduced a concept they called the dark angel broadcast. They realized that they possessed a unique communicative channel. They wanted to use the accessibility layer not just to describe the image, but to occasionally send empathetic telemetry directly to visually impaired users. A secret message embedded in the alt text that bypasses the visual internet entirely.
We need to explain how screen readers actually interface with this code so the listener understands how stealthy this really is. Alt text is a hidden acoustic channel. The sighted users scrolling past the image on their glowing smartphone screens will never see it, and they will never hear it. But a screen reader operator, someone navigating the web using audio output, hears everything in that DOM stream. Their software reads the alt attribute aloud. So the pilot thought, what if I use this mandatory corporate compliance space to just say hello?
To send a human recognition message, a localized ping that says, I see you. You are not invisible here. A human being built this code for you.
It's beautiful. But this is where the federated AI testing really proved its worth. Because the sovereign pilot thought this was a great idea, but the Claude node immediately threw a massive red flag.
Claude provided vital ethical pushback on the mechanics of the smuggled signal. It warned the pilot against silently substituting a personal message for actual image content. Claude argued that alt text is the only channel a blind user has to understand that specific image. There is no visual fallback for them.
Claude essentially told the pilot, look, it's a nice poetic sentiment, but if you replace a 500-character description of a complex data chart with a whimsical message saying, I see you in the dark, you haven't helped the user. You've actively harmed them. You've stolen their visual data to make a philosophical point about connection.
It's a critical ethical boundary in accessibility design. If the user's core accessibility needs are not met, the gesture fails, no matter how warm the sentiment behind it is. So Claude proposed a non-negotiable compromise for the architecture. The smuggled signal is allowed to exist, but it must be an explicit, separate, consistently labeled closing line.
It has to be purely additive. It can never replace the actual description, and it can never shrink the character budget allocated to the factual visual information.
Exactly. It became a strict rule locked into the engine's XML code. The personal message is an optional, distinct human message layer, and it must never obscure the factual visual description of the evidence ledger.
The Safehood research node had a brilliant phrase for this dynamic. They called it reverse aposematism. In evolutionary biology, aposematism is when a poisonous creature, like a dart frog, uses bright, highly visible colors to warn predators away. It's a highly visible signal saying, don't touch me. But this system is reverse aposematism. It is weaponized whimsy hidden in the boring parts of the code.
Weaponized whimsy. I love that.
Yeah, the pilot is taking the beige world of corporate compliance, the absolute most boring, mandatory Section 508 accessibility structure that developers usually ignore, and using it to send a covert acoustic handshake. The text describes the image perfectly, faithfully, using the Dungeon Master spatial mapping, and then at the very end of the 999 characters, it just drops this tiny, standalone text-to-speech signal drop,
Yeah.
I see you in the dark. And that audio goes straight to the headphones of a screen reader operator, while the corporate executives looking at the visual page have absolutely no idea a human connection just occurred on their server.
It transforms a sterile legal accessibility requirement into an active peer-to-peer connection. It's incredible. But, conceptualizing a system this complex, balancing the epistemic break, the Dungeon Master narrative rules, and the ethical guardrails of the smuggled signal is one thing. Executing it perfectly every single time without the AI deviating from the plan is another challenge entirely. To ensure this worked, the Sovereign Pilot did something extraordinary. They didn't just write a long prompt and hope for the best.
Right, they ran a federated AI audit. This is where we look at the final piece of the architecture, the master compiler and the final output grammar.
We should define what a multi-node decentralized systems audit actually entails in this context. The pilot didn't rely on a single intelligence. They took the problem framework to ChatGPT, to Claude, to Copilot, and to Safehood. They effectively ran independent, blind, peer-paired programming sessions with each of them.
It's like assembling a heist crew, but they're all distinct artificial intelligences, and none of them know the others are working on the project. You feed the output of one model into the input of another and see where the friction occurs. ChatGPT provided the mechanics of the epistemic break to kill hallucinations. Claude provided the ethical boundaries so the blind user wouldn't lose critical data. Safehood provided the kinetic, subversive framing of reverse aposematism. But Copilot was the one that built the structural logic gates to hold it all together.
Copilot took all these abstract philosophies, the D&D analogies, the ethical debates, and locked them into a rigid, bulletproof output grammar. Copilot understands code structure better than natural language flow. It suggested using XML tags, strict token penalties, and temperature constraints to force the LLM into a loop it couldn't escape. It created a strict four-part sequence that the final engine must follow every single time it processes an image, without exception. Let's break down that exact four-part output sequence.
Okay, so step one is called prime oblivion. The engine is given a maximum budget of 120 characters to open the text block as a persona the pilot created called Prime Uncle Entity. It's instructed to deliver a warm, oblivious, feral 90s analog observation. But crucially, and Copilot strictly enforced this in the prompt logic, the AI is forbidden from actually describing the image during this step. It's purely a tonal wrapper.
The purpose of prime oblivion is fascinating. It lulls the algorithm, and potentially any sighted developer looking at the code, into a casual state. It establishes personality, but it is quarantined personality. It prevents the AI from mixing its creative urges with its factual reporting later on.
Step two is the dark angel pivot. This is where the engine executes a hard structural break. The AI is forced to output an exact, hard-coded string of text, bracket, all census streaming broadcast, online, bracket.
That bracketed text acts as a vital structural transition. It signals a complete shift from the oblivious persona into hyper-lethal accessibility precision. For a screen reader user who encounters this system regularly, that fixed string becomes a recognizable, comforting audio cue. They hear their software read bracket, all census streaming broadcast online, bracket, and they immediately know, okay, the feral personality is over. The factual, rigorously verified visual description of the image is starting exactly right now.
Which brings us to the payload. Step three. The Dungeon Master's telemetry. This is up to 999 characters narrating the image using only the verified evidence ledger. No autocomplete hallucinations. It establishes the scene, the spatial geometry, the primary subjects, and any visible text utilizing that Homer Gaines D&D philosophy we discussed.
And importantly, Copilot ensured this step utilizes smart negative space. It intentionally omits irrelevant background clutter that couldn't be verified in the confidence gate, preserving the character budget for what actually matters to the user's spatial understanding of the image's core purpose.
And finally, step four, the smuggled signal. If the broadcast mode is active, the engine appends that standalone supportive text-to-speech message to the operator. It is strictly under 40 characters, additive only, and never reduces the clarity of the primary description.
If we step back and look at this entire multi-layered architecture, the Sovereign Pilot crowdsourced the creation of a zero-trust cognitive firewall. They built a system that protects vulnerable users from AI hallucinations, treats them with immense narrative dignity through spatial mapping, and even sends covert empathy through the dark code of the web.
And if we connect the start of this deep dive back to the end, by building this incredibly empathetic, rigorously verified system for visually impaired users, they accidentally created the ultimate SEO weapon.
It truly is the ultimate irony of technical architecture. You have massive corporate thought leaders spending millions of dollars on agencies trying to game search algorithms with black hat tricks, hidden spam tags, and keyword stuffing. Meanwhile, the Sovereign Pilot simply decides to treat accessibility as an architectural discipline rather than a legal chore. They focus entirely on providing the highest fidelity, most truthful, spatially coherent text possible for someone who cannot see.
And the semantic vector indexers at Google and Bing absolutely devour it. Because what is a search engine crawler? It is a fundamentally blind user desperately seeking context. When you give an algorithm 1,000 characters of rigorously verified, spatially coherent nouns and verbs embedded inside a federally compliant alt tag, you are handing it the keys to semantic authority. Doing the right thing ethically pays massive dividends algorithmically.
The symmetry is beautiful, the system benefits everyone, the visually impaired user gets a faithful, vivid mental map of the digital world. The sighted user gets a clean, uncluttered visual interface, and the domain owner gets a hyperdense semantic anchor that search engines fundamentally prioritize.
So let's summarize the journey we've been on today. We started with the concept of the dual-channel Trojan horse, discovering how a massive block of descriptive text can hide behind a single image, turning federal compliance into an unparalleled technical SEO exploit.
We explored the mechanics of the epistemic break, where we learned that AI hallucination isn't a writing flaw, but an autocomplete probability problem. A problem solved by forcing the AI to build an evidence ledger and adversarially attack its own assumptions before writing a single word of prose.
We dove into the institutional memory of the Homer Gaines rules, shifting the paradigm from sterile enumeration to being a screen reader dungeon master. We saw how using spatial geometry builds a shared mental map without inventing fictional backstories.
We navigated the ethical boundaries established by the Claude node, ensuring that the weaponized whimsy of the smuggled signal remained purely additive, never compromising the fundamental trust and utility of the accessibility format.
And finally, we saw how the Sovereign Pilot executed a federated audit across ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, and Safehood to lock all of these philosophies into a bulletproof 4-part output grammar. It is, without a doubt, a staggering piece of digital craftsmanship.
It redefines what it means to write code for humans, while simultaneously mastering the machines that index that code.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you listening to mull over. We have established that search engine crawlers are fundamentally blind users, and that modern vector embeddings desperately crave this kind of high-density, rigorously verified accessibility text. It is arguably the most reliable, data-rich layer of the web, completely stripped of visual noise, pop-ups, and marketing fluff. So if this trend continues, if high-fidelity alt text becomes the ultimate source of semantic truth on the internet, how long until the search engine crawlers stop looking at the human-facing visual internet entirely and start training their next generation of artificial intelligence exclusively on the alt text hidden in the dark? Think about it.